All right, good afternoon, folks. We'll give it a minute here. We're waiting for Chris to log on, and we'll give folks a chance to come in out of the waiting room, and then we'll get started. All right, I think we'll go ahead and get started. Chris has logged on, so we've got all the team here. Um, so, welcome to our roundtable on carving out profitability. I'm Dave Carter with Flowery Hill Institute, along with Chris Roper, my fellow regional director. And we are really, really pleased today to have a couple of folks that are going to talk to us about how we can take a look at that carcass and evaluate it and get the most out of it. So we got David Zarling, who's one of our uh, fellow MPPTA program folks with the Niche Meat Processing Assistance Network, and Jordan Lambert with the Ag Innovation Center at Colorado State University. So just before we get started, and before I have them introduce themselves, we'll just a couple of housekeeping things. First of all, this is being recorded and it will be archived in our toolkit. So if you have somebody that couldn't log on today or listen to it, they can download it and watch it at their leisure. Also, as we go forward, if you have questions, just put those into the Q&A box. Chris and I'll keep an eye on those, and as those come in, we'll try and feed them to David and Jordan. And then also, after this roundtable, we will be sending everyone a two-question survey. Simply, number one, what did you think of the roundtable? And number two, what are some topics you'd like to see us cover moving forward? The topic we have today is one that somebody recommended a couple of months ago. So with that, I will also give a disclaimer or a note here that David may be a little time compressed. He's running a meat plant as we speak, and as some things pop up, he may have to log off, but we'll get as much of him as we can. So with that, David and Jordan, give a little brief introduction.
Sure. Jordan, do you want to go first?
I was trying to point at you, David, but
Oh,
sure,
sorry.
I'll go first. I'm Jordan Kraft Lambert. I'm the Director of Ag Innovation and Partnerships at Colorado State University. My job is to understand the problems that Colorado farmers and ranchers are facing, which incidentally are problems that other farmers and ranchers are facing as well. And then we incubate and accelerate ag tech companies that solve those problems. And we also throw parties for problems that are worth solving that haven't been solved yet. And one of our signature events is actually called the Awful Party, which we'll talk about a little bit more later.
Great. And David.
First time I heard the description of that, I heard AWFUL and was confused, and but then when I found out what it was very, very excited about that. So I'm personally am really stoked for your segment, Jordan. I'm David Zarling. I'm program manager for the Niche Meat Processor Assistance Network. Some of you may have heard of us. We may be new to others. We're kind of a half trade group, half extension group housed at Oregon State University. And what we do is we provide technical assistance to small livestock producers, small regional meat brands, and small meat processors by definition of FSIS, all over the country. And so we do everything from business planning, the financial analysis, operational recommendations or plans, and everything in between. And in addition to that, as Dave mentioned, I also I help plants start, or I help fix plants that are really struggling. And so right now I'm on the California-Oregon border, helping with a plant startup, and that's where I am today. And as we know, Murphy's Law is alive and well, always in meat plants. So I'm really happy to see everybody here today. And I'm just curious if the participants wouldn't mind putting in the chat real quick if you are a processor or a producer, just so I can kind of get a sense of who's here today.
That's great. And David, the one thing that you didn't say in your introduction, you're the only person in the world that I know that proudly describes yourself as a meathead. So
It's true. It's true. I grew up in a household where that meant something different because Archie Bunker was on the television. But that's true. I am a bona fide meat nerd and spent my life for a long time, and it never ceases to be interesting.
so just before
So
we
yeah.
jump in, anything we missed to start?
No, again, welcome everyone. We have a lot of longtime participants with us on those roundtable discussions today, and we appreciate you all joining us. So this ought to be a great discussion for you all.
So, so starting off, David, when we talked the other day, the first point of making a profit in the meat business is understanding your costs. Um, what's your approach really to taking a look at the carcass and saying, what does it take me to process a carcass?
So it's a really good question. I appreciate, the avenue to talk about this because so many people, especially producers that walk into my door, I'm gonna harvest their animals for the first time. And everybody wants to know what's the best cut sheet? What is the most amount of artisanal and craft cuts that I can possibly get? And generally I steer people away from that model because, if you're seaming out every muscle and applying a Latin name to it, chances are you're going to be out of stock all the time. There's only 2 teres majors per animal and they weigh 0.4 of a pound, right? And so to your point, Dave, we when we talk about optimizing cut sheets, we're really talking about what's going to make the most value for you. And that depends on several different factors. So one of those, to your point, is carcass assessment. One of the factors that goes into deciding what the best utilization for you is your supply. What are you working with? Are you perhaps a producer? I work with one producer who is on the coast and they've got a dairy and they bring me burned out milkers every week. And those are not sufficient for a lot of money cuts. The middle meats are just not really much to speak of. So they've built their business around ground beef and a couple of further processed items that bring them the most value and the highest margin. I've got other producers that bring me beautiful fat cattle, and they are absolutely finished perfectly, and we are able to maximize the cuts themselves and really emphasize those and minimize grind. They don't have a lot of reason to throw their trim into, say, a snack stick or a beef summer sausage because ultimately the margin's high enough on their premium fat cattle. So assessing what your supply is first and foremost is probably the biggest component out of the 6 that I have lined out here that kind of make the perfect cocktail of carcass utilization.
So what are some of the tools that are available for folks to, figure out what it costs them to do with a carcass?
Sure. Great question. So a couple of them are really just internal assessments, just being really clear and honest about who you are as a company and understanding, am I a hobbyist that's going to sell 3 or 6 head a year, or do I have 100 head and have to move in various revenue streams, whether it's distributed wholesale, direct to consumer, e-commerce? It really depends on who you are. So who's your target customer? First, before jumping into the actual physical tool, the tool of assessment, understanding who you're selling to and what exactly it is that they want first and foremost. Okay, so I've got a producer here that does American Wagyu, and they set up shop here in a valley next to mine. Beautiful, beautiful beef, fat as ticks every time they bring them in. However, we are in a county that does not value that type of beef as much as other places. And so this producer has drastically had to change the genetics of their animal to optimize their value because while they have a freezer full of beautiful beef, they can't really sell it because they didn't assess who their target customer was going to be first. Then, I would also say assessing your strategy and expertise as far as sales and marketing goes. That can really go a long way. If you build it, they will come does not happen in the meat business. You really have to have a very clear sales and marketing strategy that's supported by financial modeling. And then that brings me to my third point. We're talking about cost, and this is where the hard tools come in. And I've got something that I'd love to show everybody momentarily, but ultimately, this is an exercise that I go through with every company that I work with. We've got conceptual ideas, products that we want to make. We know they're going to look great on the shelf. They're going to sell. They're very exciting. Biltong was really big for a super long time. People coming through the plant wanting biltong, people wanting beef liver chips, all of these kind of niche products. But what does it really take to make them, right? What is the true cost? And we'll get into that in a moment. But ultimately, understanding your cost as a producer from birth to harvest, every single penny is tremendously important to understand how to utilize the rest of the carcass. Because if you are selling your beef at $250 on the rail, or that's your assumption, and then the actual cost is $325 all in, no matter how you utilize that carcass, you're not going to make money, right? And so it's tremendously important to know your cost of production. Second point is understanding your processing costs. Third is all of the overhead along the value stream. So the non-direct costs, or the indirect costs and the fixed costs that do not go directly into your product. Incredibly important to identify. And sometimes those are difficult because they're somewhat amorphous, but understanding what your admin, your rent, your depreciated equipment that you might have, your amortized consulting services, your owner draw, all of those different things need to be spread out over every single pound that you produce in order to understand how these items are contributing to your greater cost. So I would love to talk to all 38 participants in here about how to identify costs in your livestock operation or your meat plant. And we don't have the time to go into that today because it is a lengthy discussion. But I would love to help, and feel free to reach out to me if you'd like a little more perspective on that. But just knowing, identifying those first is really important. And then from there, we can go into how to price to cover everything. So I've got a tool to share. But before I keep going, David, want to give some space for some questions there.
Yeah, no, we don't have any questions yet, but we have folks
Great.
listening in. And while you're getting that up there, I know, Chris, this is something when you work with folks, you really talk about understanding that. Why don't you, as David gets his screen up here, you might add
Yeah,
some comments.
huge, and I always enjoy talking with David and being in the same room with David. We're talking the language that a lot of our meat cutters and processors really understand is cutting meat and maximizing the cuts, but we a lot of times do not see people factoring in operating costs or understanding operating costs or the cost of their products. What does it cost to produce each cut so that they get it priced properly? That's a huge issue. A lot of the plants that you and I deal with, Dave, we can go in and ask them what their cost is, and they don't know. They can give us a spreadsheet that says how much money they spent last month, typically, but that doesn't necessarily equate to what your cost is to produce a pound of beef or a pound of pork, whatever it is you're processing. So understanding your costs is huge. And again, we are able to work with people to, even before you open a plant, we can help you identify what your operation costs are going to be. So please let us help you if you're building a plant or looking to start up a plant. Let's figure out what your costs are going to be before you open the doors. We don't want you to be broke and bankrupt. So we can identify some of the things that might be issues for your facility so that you can adjust in your plan and how you may develop your project. and hopefully get those operations costs back in line before you ever open the door. So again, and we're all here to help no matter what position or shape you're in, but we sure don't like to be part of a shutdown. We've had to be part of a plant shutdown a handful of times, and it's no fun for anybody. So let's not let you get there to begin with. Let's work through these costs ahead of time and identify them. Let's make sure you have the tools to know what your actual costs are.
Great. And I see our friend Catherine from Maine is weighed in with a question saying, would David be willing to look over a developed pro forma and give feedback? So, David?
Absolutely. I would be more than happy to, and we can schedule that time. I'll make sure that maybe in the follow-up to this, my email address is available, or I could pop it in the chat too when I get done chatting here. Happy to do it.
We've got it on a slide at the end too.
Great.
So, yep, great.
How much time do I have, Dave? I want to make sure that I don't eat
No,
into Jordan's
No,
time.
you're doing fine. But if you have that spreadsheet that you want to
I
pull
do.
up, I think that'd be great. Yep.
I do. And so I want to give just a quick story. It'll take 2 minutes to kind of justify the why here. Recently worked with a producer who also had a plant, and they wanted to have a jerky business. They wanted to do a little bit of grind, but almost entirely jerky. So here's what we did. They said, we have signed a deal to be nationally distributed, and they are going to buy our jerky for $6 a unit. Can you believe that? At 3 ounces, 3.5 ounces, that is over, it's almost $30 a pound. That's really great. And I thought, okay, that's pretty great. It's maybe closer to 25. My mental math's a little off today, but and when the first few shipments went out, they couldn't figure out why the ink wasn't black on the P&L. And so what we found out was the beef cost $3.50 on the rail. Processing was $1.35 a pound. The overhead for the company was 79 cents a pound. And then the extra logistic costs ended up being about 25 cents a pound. So all in, we had a cost, right? Once the jerky was processed, after adding the jerky fee and the yield, so you take all your costs and you divide it by the yield percentage, that beef went from $3.50 a pound up to about $18 a pound, $19 a pound, $20 a pound. By the time they got it to the distributor, who gave it a 35% markup, and they sold it to the retailer for 40%. It cost them $18 to produce this jerky, but it was being purchased from them for $14.54 a pound. So every single time a shipment went out, they lost $3 a pound because the costs were not identified. So we can talk more about that in the future. However, I've got a little something that I'd like to share with everybody, and it's a tool that NPAN is going to make available on our website very shortly in the next couple of weeks that everybody will be able to use. Now, it will, over the years, probably take several different iterations to include direct costs, indirect costs, gross margin, contribution margin, and various metrics that can help you understand the actual profitability and break-even point for every one of your products. And that's going to be in like version 2. But this initial version it's a retail margin analysis tool. This can be adapted to
Now
your
we just
farmers.
have a black screen.
Oh, do you?
David? Yeah.
Oh goodness, I wonder why. Let's try it again.
Sometimes
Use
when I
our
share
imagination, but
sometimes when I share my whole desktop, it doesn't work. But if you share the individual window,
there
there
we
we
got
go.
it.
Perfect.
Okay.
Probably that famous Siskiyou County internet that I've got out here. So this is what we call the retail margin analysis tool. And so again, this can be adapted to your D2C business. It can be adapted to service offerings in your plants, whatever it may be. But ultimately, what we want to figure out is how do you take all of your products, incorporate the yield from your carcass or whatever your production is, and then assign different prices, different sell prices to those so that you're able to come across with an aggregate positive margin. So you may not be able to sell soup bones for $15.99 a pound. You may be only able to move those for $1 a pound, but those only make up a 12% of your carcass. So how do you then take the rest of your cuts to subsidize and come out in black? So here's how this works. This is a tool that I've used many times over for small livestock producers who want to figure out how the heck do I price each one of my cuts. Here's what we do. On the left-hand column, I'm going to put my live weight of my animal. And I'm going to put my price per pound. Now, that's very high, but that's where we're at in 2025 in some places of the country. Then we're going to put in our hanging weight, and that's going to auto-calculate a live to hang yield. And then we're going to put in our final packaged weight. And then that's also going to auto-calculate our cut and wrapped yield. We're going to add our processing in by putting in the price per pound, or the cost per pound rather. And that's going to auto-calculate our processing fee. And then we're going to add our kill fee. What we come up with there is a total yielded cost. Okay. This is everything all in so far. And you may want to add another line item that has your logistics. You may want to add a line item where if you want to depreciate your new equipment over each pound of meat that you produce, you could do that. You could make that a variable expense if you wanted to, based on volume. However, this allows you to aggregate all of your total cost. Now, this then auto-calculates your cost per pound. All in, this producer was $6.79 a pound. This looks at an average sale price per pound, which we'll get to, and then it calculates some other numbers. So before we get there, we're going to come up here. So what I've done is we've broken out just an average cutout, and this could be replaced with your yield report from your processor very easily. And what this allows you to do is pull different levers and play with different prices to come up with an overall gross margin for that animal or for that load of beef that you had processed. And so what we do is we go through and we assign each cut off your cutout your proposed retail price per pound. And if you're starting from scratch, you can go to the USDA beef report, or you can go to your local butcher shop that has a comparative product. You could go to the local grocer. You just start somewhere. And then in column C, we're going to add the amount of units. How many packages, not how many pounds yet, but how many packages come off an average animal or out of that particular slaughter lot. We're then going to add your average pound per unit. So if you've got 22 ribeyes and they average out to 0.93 pounds each, you're going to add that here. And then it'll auto-calculate your total pounds. And then based off your initial price per pound, whatever you're going to try first, it'll calculate your total revenue. So as you can see, ground beef here is 202 units at $7.99 a pound, making $1,600. Soup bones are $1 a pound, but there's only 12 units per, and that's $36. You see how that kind of comes together. And what that does is it takes this number down here, which is the total sales revenue, and it applies it to our total cost, and it calculates a gross profit and a gross margin. So if this was to be my actual set of numbers here, I'd know that I'd be running a 41.82% gross margin, and I could use that gross profit number to find out, am I covering my overhead costs? Let's just say this load was all the beef that I was going to process for the month. Does this cover all of my overhead costs for the month? If it doesn't, it's time to play with the numbers. And you play with the numbers by either reducing your cost or raising your sales price. This way you know you're covering the nut. Really, really important. Now, you might have a scenario where I've got multiple revenue streams. I've got my D2C e-commerce platform, and then I've got a sweet farm to school deal where they're going to take, just ground beef and 5-pound chubs. Price isn't quite the same, though. We know that the school system is not going to pay the same price for your beef wholesale and in bulk as your D2C, direct to consumer customers are going to be paying, right? So how do we balance that out to make sure you have an aggregate gross profit and gross margin, right? This allows you to add a second revenue stream, and you could copy as many as you like. We just have 2 examples here. So this is the wholesale cut sheet. Let's say I've got the same beef, cost me the same to raise it, but I'm only going to be producing 1-pound ground beef wholesale for one wholesale customer and some soup bones and some filet, because we just can't throw the filet in the trim. So what you'll see is the wholesale price for the ground beef is $1.49 a pound less, right? Because you've got to make it more attractive to those wholesale customers. You got to be more competitive. Our filet is a little bit more expensive than our typical retail cutout. And what we notice is that our total revenue off of this beef is $3,400. Well, holy smokes, this is the same beef, it's $1,500 less. This happens all the time with people who are getting into wholesale accounts that want to move volume, right? So if you look, the vitals are the same. 1,100-pound live weight, 250 a pound price on the hoof. We got a 650-pound hang weight. We've got the same cut and wrap yield. Processing's the same per pound, and the kill fee's the same. This sheet will auto-calculate your break even. I know that I have to sell my average sales price for a certain amount. And this shows the sales price average per pound. However, because of the total costs, which you see is $3,467, our total sales revenue is $2.50 less than that, operating at a negative margin. However, we've got another table here that gives you the weighted gross margin. Okay, it's the aggregate gross. And this shows that if you were 50-50 in your sales, straight up volume, and you're running this 41% margin on your retail and a basically break even on your wholesale, you're still going to have a almost 21% gross margin. When you calculate that gross profit, you can say, all in, am I covering my overhead and my net profit, which we would like to have, right? We'd like to have a net profit. That's what we're all in this for. So the purpose of this sheet is really to allow you to play with pricing and play with volume and understand where you're going to end up at the end of the month if you sell everything based on your costs. And this is why understanding all of your costs are so deeply important, because when you have these numbers, you can actually take that gross margin, you can take all of your expenses, you can break those out and figure out what is contributing to your overhead costs and whether or not you're going to have a net profit. So this is a tool that I use, Dave, and I think it's pretty easy to approach, and it doesn't tell everything, but it really gets you on the path towards understanding.
That's a great tool, David. And you say that's going to be available on the NPAN website?
Yeah, that's right. We've got a couple of tools we put together. We've got this retail margin analysis tool, and we've also got a tool for processors that allows you to put in all of your costs, your direct costs, to understand what your service fee should be, what your processing fees, your tolling fees for co-packing should be. Rather than competing on price with your neighbors, competing on price is a race to the bottom. Always will be. And someone really wise recently said to me in a discussion like this, one of the people in the roundtable said, well, what if all my neighbors are charging 85 cents a pound of processed beef and my costs and the margin that I need are $1.25 a pound? What am I going to do? As long as your costs are not out of control and they're realistic for the region that you're in, eventually that competitor is not going to be able to charge that anymore. They're going to go out of business. We see it every day. And then people are going to be forced to come to you. So my recommendation is really hold steady with your costs and with what's true for you. You can always reduce cost. You can always raise prices to make that margin, but don't compete on price if you can help it.
And
Yes,
do
I see your
quality
head
work.
nodding up
Yeah.
and down. Yep.
Like do quality work, right, David? I mean, if you're doing quality work, your customers will pay the premium for you compared to your 85-cent neighbor. So, and another thing that really just triggered a lot of things there, David, with your yields, you have to know your yields. And in order for you to know your yields, you have to capture the data. You have to know the live weight, the hanging weight, and your finished product weight, or you can't know your cost. So those of you that are building plants or have plants, if you don't have scales in place or systems in place to capture these weights at these critical points, you have to even if you're just a fee for service processor, you have to be able to transfer this information to your ranchers and your customers so that they know their yields. There's a huge difference between a bison yield, a cull cow yield, a fed heifer yield, a fed steer yield. They're all different. So you can't plug in the same numbers on every animal. You're not going to have the same outcome, and you're gonna be in the hole. If you build all your numbers off of a fed steer, you're going to be disappointed when you start bringing cull cows in. Or so there's a mixture there that you have to know your business. So, we can come in and help you find it, but usually that's too late when if we're there trying to help you find the problem.
Yep. That's great. Well, Jordan, you've been sitting on the sidelines here. When David's talking about the carcass, and there's a whole nother half of the carcass that tends to be a real cost center for smaller processors. I've used the example that USDA puts out a daily drop report that says it's about $160 in value for the byproducts. Well, it is if you're one of the large processors, but if you're a smaller processor, you've been paying to have it hauled away, and that's what you've been trying to tackle. So talk a little bit about what the Ag Innovation Center has been doing with the off-haul party over the last 18 months.
Sure, will do. But before I do that, I have to give you a compliment, David. I have an MBA from Harvard Business School, and I'm feeling like I didn't need it because you should have just gone to David's class. Like that was world class. That was fantastic, man. Really appreciate
Well,
it.
thank you very much, Jordan. But you should not have showed your cards, because now I'm going to be just emailing you and messaging you constantly, because I do not have a degree in accounting, but I'm endlessly fascinated by it. So I very much admire your skill set.
Wow, that was super great, man. Thank you. That tool, that's going to be so useful for everybody. So in answer to your question, Dave, the other half, maybe I'll back up and give a little bit of background on how we arrived at doing this. So I think I said at the top of the call that my job is to understand problems that our Colorado farmers and ranchers and supply chain partners like processors are facing to get food from the fields into people's mouths. And in order to do that work, we keep a database of every problem any farmer, rancher, or supply chain partner has ever told us about. It's several hundred lines long now. But when I first got this job in 2023, I started asking everyone who would talk to me, like, what are your problems? What's challenging for you? And logging them in this database so that I could, if I found solutions, I could backtrack to the people who had the problem, And there was this problem that just kept coming up in a lot of different ways from a lot of different people. And it actually took me like 6 or 9 months to really understand that it was all the same problem, that, producers were coming to me saying like, I have a margin problem. I can't sell, especially our direct to consumer beef producers. We're having a margin hard time. And, our processors were coming to us saying like, I've got all this stuff and I have to send it to the landfill. And that sucks. And I'm over here, like my background is dairy farming and crop genetics. So like the whole beef area was new to me. So maybe I was a little slow on the uptake, but eventually I was like, okay, like these are actually all aspects of the same problem. I'm just hearing the problem being said differently from a producer's perspective than from a processor's perspective. So once a quarter, we go through and look at that database and we say, okay, what are problems that just like seem to be chronic and keep coming up and that really matter for the majority of our farmers and ranchers? And so this whole issue of what do you do with the organ meats and hides and blood and bone in a direct to consumer meat, small to mid scale size processing system. And so we were like, okay, sounds like we're not utilizing the organ meats and hides in all of the ways that we would like to do. I'm going to have to get real smart on this real quick. So I learned that offal is often pronounced differently than that for a reason. But you know, I was hanging out talking with somebody and I was like, you know what? I think we need to have some sort of a party, like maybe about organ meats and hide. Maybe we could call it like an awful party. And like the people I was with just started laughing because they had the same impression that you did, David, AWFUL. And actually, you would be shocked how many people came to our first awful party because they thought that they had been invited to an awful party. And they were just like, what does that even mean? I am now curious, right? So we had probably a good 25% of the first like set of attendees were just there because they had been invited to an AWFUL party and they wanted to know what that was going to be like. So curiosity gets you a long way, it turns out. But what we were really trying to do with that first awful party and what we've done subsequently is try to make a safe space for people to try organ meats in a place where it's prepared really, really well and with the story around it. And that we actually give them permission at the beginning of the awful party to spit it out if they don't like it, as long as whoever you're talking to when you're eating this congratulates you for trying something that you had never tried before. So we try really hard to make it a safe space. So our first annual awful party that we did in 2024, I guess, no, 2023, I guess it was one where we did it alongside the National Western Stock Show, which is a really big, it's 2 weeks in January where you have a whole lot of seed stock folks, a lot of rodeo, a lot of people go through there. So we had it at that time and we brought in a Honduran chef who had been trained in France to make some really fancy dishes for us. So they made a tripe dish in a mondongo coconut citrus sauce. We had sofrito pig's ears. We had a mezcal liver mousse. There were 5 dishes overall. And what I found totally fascinating about this particular party was that I kind of thought that like half of the party participants were going to try it and hate it. And the other half would be like, oh, like maybe that was okay. And that turned out not to be true. What turned out to be more true is that every attendee at this party, with the exception of one person, so one person out of 135, found at least one dish that they didn't know that they loved. So it's not so much, are you an awful person or are you not an awful person? It's what kind of awful person are you? Because we had people who didn't really think that tripe was their thing, but then they had this mondongo coconut sauce and for them, it felt like calamari. It was a very tender calamari. You didn't even have to chew very much. So if you liked calamari, it turns out like maybe tripe is right for you. There were a whole lot of people there who had had grandma's liver prepared in a certain way, and bless our grandmas, they had a lot of things to do, but I would submit to you that most American grandmas did not know how to prepare liver in a palatable way. But this mezcal liver mousse, let me tell you, it was really incredible. So for that first awful party, it kind of proceeded in 3 parts. The first part was actually really revealing to the attendees what the awful problem was. So we had 5-minute lightning talks from the rancher's perspective, a processor's perspective, a meat scientist's perspective, and then the chef's perspective, how long it took them and why they prepared the organ meats the way that they did, a lot of the time using heritage, grandmother from Honduras inspired recipes to really tell the story of the whole thing. So that was the first part. The second part was actually announcing what we held in 2024, which was the awful business plan competition, saying like, we have this problem where we need to do something about the 44% of the weight of this animal that's ending up in the landfill right now. who's got a crazy awesome idea and is an entrepreneur and wants to do something about that? In a year's time, we'll come together and bring everybody together for the Awful Business Plan competition. Winner will win $10,000 to see what they can do to build an awful business. So that was the second part of the party. And then the third piece of that party was enjoying this fabulous organ meat that had been prepared in all of these different ways. And what we were really trying to do in terms of the attendees at this party was have about 50% of those attendees be foodies, about 25% be producers, ranchers, cattle feeders, backgrounders. A fair number were processors, and the remainder were folks who had an entrepreneurial desire. So they were there to learn more about where they could build a business in this space. This last year, we did it again. We hosted the Awful Business Plan competition. We had 5 really amazing companies who competed in the competition, and a really great one took home that $10,000, and they're building their company right now. And then we added on a special part of this last awful party, which was the genuine leather fashion show. So we really wanted to show off how hide could become a high performance material that is leather, that is more breathable, durable, and biodegradable than any synthetic, and really celebrate that. So people came for the fashion show. We Trojan horsed some extra education about our food system that most people don't know about. And then everybody got to eat some organ meats that they weren't planning on eating, but they all found a dish that they liked. And so this last awful party was about twice the size of the first awful party. So yeah.
That's good. I see Nicole said, yeah, the awful party was great and the dishes were really delicious. Yes. And
Yeah.
I would concur, particularly on that first one where you said there were 5, there were 4 out of the 5 I loved. I won't say the one that didn't meet my taste buds, but the point is, yeah, trying to, when we're talking about the value across the carcass, it's the whole carcass. It's the whole carcass. And we got to figure out the cost that we have, on those byproducts with the offal, and how can we do that? And Jordan, you talked about the offal dishes, you talked about the leather. We've had a couple of roundtables in the last month that has talked about pet products.
Yep.
And it's amazing because I was involved in a pet food startup 20 years ago where the slogan was "Let byproducts be bygones," because they wanted to, we're not going to feed our byproducts to these pets. We're going to do away with that. And I was just at a global pet expo here about 3 weeks ago, and it's great that they are now calling out, made with nutritious organ meat. Um, pipe somebody's doing specializing with, and so it's great to see that. There's also, with the awful party, there were some things, cosmetics, skincare, some of the so talk about the broad range of things that people can do.
Oh, yeah. And we're finding more all the time. To build a little bit on David's point that he was making earlier, like it's so important to know your customer when you get started. And what has been really magical for me going on this awful journey is discovering how many customers are interested in the benefits that come from organ meats and hides. They just wouldn't think to look to organ meats or hides to meet those needs. So much about creating value from the organ meats and hides is marketing. So if you can find that, people are interested. So to your point, Dave, of the 5 entrepreneurs who competed in this awful business plan competition, 2 were pet treat and pet food companies. But the other 3 were in different spaces. So one of them was a bone broth company. So they were charging an obscene quantity of money for really artisanal bone broth. If you guys haven't tried Denver bone broth, it's a next level bone broth experience. It's worth the shipping fee. Try it. And they've done a really great job. The markup on that is high. It's good. So that was one of the companies. And to Dave's point, the fashion and beauty segment, I did not consider cattle part of the fashion and beauty supply chain until I started working on the awful party. I'd always thought of cattle as part of the food supply chain, but not fashion, especially as I went into more of the hide side. So we had, not at this awful party, but in other places, people who are thinking about building story leather that are being marketed in different ways to fancy brands who care about the provenance, the story that the meat comes from. If you guys haven't seen Range Revolution, Google it. They're simple leather bags that she's selling for $700 a piece. It's worth looking at. Kate Hafstead has built a couple of businesses that way, and you can too. There's another company that was so great. Maybe Google her. Wild Melts is a tallow company. I know a lot of folks are doing tallow right now. This particular tallow company, Wild Melts, has really beautiful marketing. She's selling these little tiny jars for $35 to $70 a piece, depending on what's in there, man. Right? So yeah, Dave's eyes got big. You know, like you can take something that if you just, you know, just like, here's a jar of tallow. But what she's able to do is say, this is a solution for your acne. This is a solution for folks who have rosacea. This is, you know, so she gets really into like the particular skin conditions that are the concern that the consumer is coming to them with. So that's another one. We have another one that's coming up right now. There's a really cool company called High Plains Biochar that makes miniaturized furnaces for making bone char. And it makes two products that come out of it. Bone tallow is one, and the other one is bone char. Apparently, bone char is one of the best things that you can have for water filtration. So some people really care about that a lot. And then we also see some interesting movement in the biodigestion and general biochar space, more for a soil amendment kind of a situation. There's a really cool piece of technology called the HARP anaerobic digester that is small scale, like the size of a desk-ish. Well, maybe a little bit bigger than a desk, but it's smallish, and it can handle some pretty difficult stuff and turn it into some really beautiful plant fertilizer. So those are some examples.
And I would just say that some of those companies that you just mentioned are listed in our resource directory that we have in our toolkit for Flowery Hills. So the last thing with you, Jordan, is, you know, David talked about understanding your cost in
Yeah.
producing products. You know, how about the thing, you know, when you talk about tripe and those type of things, the importance for folks to understand what does it take for getting those byproducts processed.
Yeah, that's so true. And I think that's a part where I'm actually really excited to see if there are areas in y'all's supply chains where you're like, I would love to market tripe, but it takes me too long to power wash that stuff. I wish I had a tripe power washer, automated robot equipment. Why don't we have a dishwasher for tripe? Tell me things like that. Because if it doesn't exist, I can help find entrepreneurs who are excited about building that for you. So I am constantly open to suggestions that would be like, I'm interested in marketing this thingy, but it takes too long to render the tallow. One of the things that we are really curious about is seeing if we can find a piece of equipment that would make it easy to render kidney tallow much more quickly than standing over the stove and slaving over it. So if there are pieces of technology that would enable you guys, I want to know about them, especially if you haven't found them.
Great. And Catherine, I know, David, you answered this on, you know, privately to her, but I'd want to share it. She says, what I've seen is processors who charge less for processing add additional fees for waste disposal, packaging, ultimately increasing the processing per pound fee. Does it make sense to wrap all of those expenses up into the processing fee and not have multiple fees, or to separate the expenses? So, go ahead,
Well,
David.
well, this is really subjective because some people feel that their customers or the precedent set in their county or town is that people want to see the line items, what they're paying for. Personally, I wrap it all into one price, and I want it to just be, this is what you pay. There's nothing, you know, there's you're not going to get nickel and dimed on the end. This is inclusive of all of these things. So I prefer to just wrap it up into one price. That said, I do also I am very diligent about raising the price 2 to 3% annually to account for average inflation. If we don't account for it, nobody else is going to.
So, and folks, if you've got some questions, type them into the Q&A here. We'll get to them. But Chris, your thoughts?
Yeah, and kind of there was a question. I think Nikki answered it offline, but this recording will be available after we're done. It'll be posted to the flowerhill.institute website in our resource directory. So for if any of you have to drop off early, just know that we'll make sure it's available here very soon.
So, any questions anybody would like them to answer? Or David, any questions you want to ask Jordan, or vice versa?
Oh gosh, when I think about, okay, so I'm working with a couple people right now who are really, really trying to maximize the value of the carcass, especially through offal, because their cost of production is so tremendously high.
Mhm.
And they are trying to be in distributed wholesale and retail, which obviously eats up any margin that you have. So they're really trying to squeeze pennies out, and that's how the big packers make their money, is just on the inedibles, right? So one of the things that I'm being asked about often is, rendering tallow. They're going out and they're contacting Cleveland and they're getting steam jacket kettles.
Yep.
However, once they've rendered the tallow in the kettle, and assuming that they've built it on a high enough platform that they're able to unload it into the proper vessel to cool it in compliance with Appendix B,
Mhm.
how do they then fill their containers without spending a ton of money on an automated line, but without doing it by hand
Mm.
with ladles? What is there? Have you seen anywhere out there a tool that allows you to take a warm enough to pour tallow and portion it into, say, a jar, a mason jar? Have
Yeah,
you seen anything like that out there? That's
I
cheap.
haven't, but I'm writing it down right now because it's
Yes,
that
please.
kind of a thing that I want to know about. Because yeah, it's pieces like that. Like, we need to make it so much easier for our processors to be able to get to access these additional revenue lines. So I'm totally writing that one down.
Jordan,
I have a question.
somebody, oh,
Oh, go
go
ahead.
ahead. Somebody asked here, can you repeat the product that rendered the tallow and made the bone char?
Yes, it's called High Plains Biochar is the name of the company. They have several furnaces. There's a particular one that is made for the bone char piece. I think I might even have a video of it here that I think I can answer this question. Can I answer? Oh, no. Answer. I can type it. Oh, I did that wrong, guys. I'm sorry.
We can try to
Oh,
get the info and add it to our website as well.
yeah,
We have a
I'll
lot
put it.
of,
I tossed it in the chat. The YouTube video for the bone chart one is in the chat.
there you go.
Okay, great.
I have a question for you, actually, David. Like, I'm also curious about particularly the emergent. So our large scale processors are able to capture value from organ meats in many cases by sending them to other markets overseas, right? Who do value these cuts. And one of the things that I'm just watching the demographics of the United States change quite a lot now. So it, like, 2022 is the first year that we had over 20 million Asian Americans in the United States. It was the same year that we had over 60 million Latina identifying people and Hispanic identifying people. And so you have up to 40% of the domestic US population are now folks whose heritage has valued organ meats in the past. And I was just curious if you're seeing successful examples of processors building those markets domestically at all.
See, how do I? Yes. So what I have found is, and this is painting with some very broad strokes,
Mm-hmm.
I would say that generally speaking, those markets are accustomed to paying a much lower price than what many of our small producers are trying to sell for. So a lot of folks that I work with are trying to sell their liver for the same price as their ground beef.
I see. Yeah.
Because the Maha movement right now and the supplement industry and all of the the kind of science adjacent nutritional um, trends that are happening right now are very competitive,
Mm-hmm.
and the demand for those products is very high, and the price that people are willing to pay is higher. And so I'm finding that a lot of those markets where people will consume those in their home, people don't want they want the tripe and tongue and cheeks. Some of the best parts of the animal are there, there's a disparity in what the market has typically cost over the years and what the niche market is costing today. So I think that there's going to be some as the demand for these specialty products lower, which inevitably they will once everybody is on board with it. I think that we'll need to kind of reevaluate how do we make this accessible to everybody. How do our neighbors who have different dietary interests and traditions than us, how do they get great meat without having to go and get it from cash and carry at the bottom dollar for the lowest possible quality standard? You know what I mean? So I think it's an interesting spot right now. I really do. And for small processors, something like a tripe washer that's going to cost them $85,000
Mhm.
and a whole person to operate it over an 8-hour shift, that's a tough pill to swallow unless you got the volume to justify it. So there's a
Yeah.
lot there.
No,
So
I think
here
it's really
we've had,
interesting to hear you talk
go
about the
ahead, Jim.
core area as
Yeah.
being a particularly aggressive customer segment. Sorry, go ahead, Dan.
So we've had some questions roll in that we're coming out of time here. So, but this one's really interesting from Hillary. It says, do I have to have a cottage license to make products, or is there a particular certification needed, like GAP certification equivalent in this area? Can cottage food license folks make some of these products that you're talking about, Jordan? Yeah.
Well, I think you can, and I mean, you would know better about the regulation aspect than me, but like, it's very important to consult your state and federal government guidelines. They're different for pets than they are for humans, and there should be resources in your state. And I know Dave knows where a lot of those are. Is that a fair answer?
Yeah. Yeah, no, we can go through with a lot of that. And the general thing with cottage food certifications on anything is it a health, is it a potential health thing? So your requirements get skin tallow for skincare probably isn't as stringent as bone broth, type stuff. So we can talk about that. Katrina asked if the spreadsheet used earlier is available online. It'll definitely be niche on the NPAN website, and we will link to it from our website. And then Jordan Arthur says, are your processors selling the offal to a maker of these products, or are they creating the products within their own company?
I have examples of both. So I have, for instance, out here we have Colorado Craft Beef. They raise their animals, they process them, and then they also market tallow and ancestral ground beef, enriched ground beef. And then we have like Wild Melts, for instance. She's purchasing from a local processor all of her kidneys, and then she's rendering them and marketing them. So both ways.
On one of our earlier roundtables, we had somebody making the pet products that it wasn't the processor, but they have teamed with the processor, sort of a partnership on that. So, yeah, I think that it can be done both ways. So we're running out of time here. Nikki, if you go ahead and put the slide up that has their contact information. And Chris, did we have another question come in here before we're wrapping up?
I think there's several. We may not be able to get to all of them, but Hillary asked, my meat processor has told me that there are parts I cannot have back, like the head. Is this true? Hillary, we've heard this quite a bit. Sometimes that's just the processor not wanting to sort through everything they've done that day. I think you're going to have to work through what challenges they're faced with maybe and see why they're not wanting to give you that head back. There should not be any inspection issues as to giving you that head back, especially if it's your animal and you brought it in. So I would go a little bit deeper on the conversation and find out why they're not letting you have that back.
Yep.
I
Yeah.
know I'm running short on time, but
Short time. So yeah, we'll answer some of these questions online. Catherine again says, yeah, if we could have halal tallow and other products, there's a real market out for that, and I totally agree with that. So we'll answer some of these questions offline. And here's the contact, David and Jordan. You can reach out to them personally for more information. But I think we've started a very good conversation here today. So, David, anything you want to add to wrap up?
Just thanks for having me. I really love talking about this stuff, and it's always good to work with you guys. And yeah, just thank you very much for thinking of me today.
You bet. And thank you for breaking away to be with us for the full hour here, David. Jordan, how about you?
Yeah, thank you guys so much for having me. David, it was so fun to learn from you. And if you guys want to shoot me an email, I'm happy to sign you up for the Awful newsletter, which comes out monthly, which has some answers to recipes and why organ meats are fantastic from a nutritional perspective. So feel free to email me if you're interested in that.
Chris, the final word?
No, thank you all very much for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you again here in a few weeks.
And remember, you'll be getting a 2-question survey, so please fill that out and send back to us, particularly ideas of things you'd like to see us cover down the road. We're always wanting to put together these roundtables with information that's pertinent to folks that are in this space. So thank you, everybody, for being here, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thanks, y'all. Appreciate you guys.